Another tough week for mortgage holders, with the Reserve Bank raising rates for the 12th consecutive month to 4.1%. Reality is starting to hit home, if it hasn't already, with new figures showing more Australians are falling behind on repayments. Leith Van Onselen is the co-founder of MacroBusiness, and he joins me now. Leith, thank you so much for your time. How much longer can the government claim to not bear any responsibility for the position so many Australians are now in?
Yeah, it's a funny situation, isn't it? We've basically left our responsibility for inflation to obviously the Reserve Bank, who's only got one tool, and that's interest rates. Now, it's a very blunt tool because interest rates only affects roughly 1/3 of the population, those who've obviously got a mortgage. But really, there's two pressures that are pushing up Australia's inflation, which are wholly in the control of the federal government. So the first one is obviously residential rents. Now, we're seeing those rise at double-digit rates across the country primarily because the federal government's flooding the place with immigration. And we've got obviously record population growth. And so that's actually the single largest contributor to Australia's inflation. The other one is actually energy prices. So on July 1 this year, energy prices, so electricity prices across the East Coast are going to rise by 25%, which comes on top of a 25% increase roughly last year. And this is primarily caused by the fact that we haven't reserved our East Coast gas like every other exporter in the world. And what that's basically meant is that Australia is now paying the highest gas price in the world, despite the fact that we are the Saudi Arabia of gas. It is moronic. And the whole thing is, if they want to solve the inflation problem in Australia, we basically need the federal government to do two things: moderate immigration so that the supply side of the economy, talking business investment, infrastructure, and also housing, can keep pace with the population growth. That'll improve productivity and reduce inflationary pressures. But also, they've got to solve this energy problem we've got by reserving our gas and making sure that we pay well below the global price like they do in WA, where they've done that.
Moronic almost doesn't even do it justice. Anthony Albanese was asked today about the government's incorrect prediction about rate rises given in the federal budget in May. Now, he remained tight-lipped about Mr Lowe's future as RBA governor, and he didn't offer really any reassurances as to his reappointment. Take a listen.
Why did the budget predict the cash rate to stay at 3.85%? I mean, it's wrong a month later.
Well, that's a question for the Treasury Department. And I'm sure Mr Kennedy will be able to answer that. That's not the only prediction on interest rates that have not been correct. It's not as incorrect as the one saying there'd be no increases till 2024. So these things are all relative.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. Is he gone then, Philip Lowe?
Those decisions, down the track. But
mid-year, the Treasurer said, so it's kind of mid-year, I was thinking.
Not really. Not really.
Our own Andrew Clennell there hosting the PM there. Leith, is Philip Lowe just unfairly hammered here, or is it justified? What did you make of those comments?
Look, I actually think it's partially justified. So again, I don't blame the Reserve Bank. They've got one tool, and they've basically inflation's running hot because the federal government primarily isn't doing its job. But at the same time, the RBA has been incredibly passive in telling the federal government what it needs to do. So why isn't the RBA governor saying, look, you've got to moderate immigration because the whole supply side of the economy, business investment, infrastructure, housing cannot keep pace. That's wrecking productivity. And it's going to push up inflation. Why aren't you solving the energy crisis?
Leith, and I've got to admit here, and Luke Grant is watching now because he texted me. I was listening to his show yesterday morning you were on, and you made some point about something that Lowe had said that you needed to be a really smart money man to understand, that almost alluded to what the government needed to do. Explain that to my viewers here.
Yeah, so basically last week, Phil Lowe fronted the Senate Estimates Committee, where he said exactly what I've just said. He said that basically the whole supply side of the economy, business investment, infrastructure, housing, is not going to grow by 2% this year, which is what the population is going to grow by. And if we don't grow those things by the same rate as the population, we're going to be in trouble, and productivity is going to slide, and inflation is going to rise. Now, what that effectively was saying, but you got to read between the lines. It was basically saying immigration's too high. But my question for Phil Lowe is, why don't you just say it? Like, instead of, people like me having to read between the lines and interpret what you're saying, just come out and say, look, mate, it's too hot. In your budget, you forecast that we're going to have 2.2 million extra people over the next 5 years. We're going to add 5 Canberras or a Perth in just 5 years. The rental market's in crisis. We've got double-digit rents. That's the biggest contributor to CPI. We've got an energy crisis. Why aren't they just saying directly, cut immigration, to a sustainable level and fix the energy crisis. And then, voila, inflation will come down and the RBA won't have to smash the 1/3 of the population who's got mortgages into oblivion. Simple as that.
Leith, that would require someone in a position of power actually telling it like it is, and we both know that that will never, ever happen. Leith Van Onselen, co-founder of MacroBusiness, thank you so much for your time.